Have you ever seen emotions? Have you recognized them as individual modules of your mind which can take over from time to time, like these characters in this animation that you see? And whether you believe it or not, this is actually the case. Your emotions are like characters which take over the mind from time to time with varying intensity, depending on what is happening to you and how strongly you feel. So when anger is in control, all you can think about is acting out and feeling angry. And at that time, it all seems like a great idea. The same thing for sadness. If you're sad, then it appears like this is the only state that makes sense and there is no point in breaking out of the sadness. But then, before you know it, sooner or later, joy comes into your life and you realize that there was nothing to be sad about. Then how is it that these modes keep changing, right? And one way to understand this is to visualize it. It is very hard to visualize something like emotions, but it has been done brilliantly in a popular Hollywood movie called Inside Out, which is essentially about psychology. The point I'm trying to make, and the reason I'm talking about this movie, is because the way they visualize emotions, which we never do, almost never do. And this is at the heart of emotional intelligence. You see, what emotional intelligence boils down to is understanding one's emotions. And one way to understand them is to visualize them and is to see them from a distance. Because if you see something from a distance, you then slowly start to understand it objectively rather than just getting swept away with its flow. And the same six emotions, the universal emotions of humans, affect different people in different ways. And how the interaction of these emotions is what leads to conflict, which also is what leads to the resolution of these conflicts, and the degree to which you understand your own emotions, the degree to which you understand the emotions of somebody else, and how you use this information. How you use this information is critical. How you use it to navigate the world, to smoothen out conflicts, to resolve issues, to bring people together, to establish and to provide happiness, and to administer leadership, which is your job as a civil servant. How well you do this and how much understanding you have of your own intelligence and of others is what emotional intelligence is all about. Brings us to the topic of good governance. Now, there is a lot to be said about good governance. It's a very important topic in as much as your general studies is concerned, as well as ethics, as well as essays. It is a umbrella concept. You need to understand what it boils down to is a government and a way of governance which is not top down, which is not elitist, which is not authoritarian, which is democratic, which is open, transparent, where it is for the people. A mechanism of governance which works for the people and it molds itself to help the people who it actually represents, right? And that idea is at the center of many of the policy changes, administrative changes happening around the world in public administration, especially the one in India. And having ethics and having emotional intelligence is very important. In fact, I would say that good governance is a concept which a country might adopt, or which a bureaucracy or a public service of a country might adopt. But the emotional counterpart of good governance at the individual level, is emotional intelligence. Say a civil servant who wishes to administer and impart good governance. How should they do this? What calibration and internal molding and restructuring would they do to make sure that they are contributing in good governance? The answer is becoming emotionally intelligent. If you become emotionally intelligent, you understand the way people behave, what motivates them, and if you do so ethically, you are practicing good governance at the individual level, right? And of course, it can be practiced because of the way the policies and the rules and the laws are structured. But it all depends on the person who is wielding that power of administration at that particular time, whether that's a police officer or that's a tax officer or that's an administrator or that's a development officer. It boils down to how emotional intelligence is used, to what extent it is used, or is it even used at all, right? And we have discussed and seen how it is so central to everything which we talk about in public services, in your life as leaders. So there is no question that there are going to be questions about this stuff in your exam. And about good governance, then good governance and emotional intelligence. You see, again, it directly comes from our previous discussion about emotional intelligence and leadership. Emotional intelligence of the leader in an organization has a very large impact over the ethical culture that exists, right? So I was talking about leading by example, and if one of the problems that one faces in a public service, which might even be the subject of a case study or a question, how do you increase ethical behavior? How do you decrease corruption in your administration, in your organization, in your district or whatever? How do you make sure that happens? And one way to do that comes directly from emotional intelligence is to lead by example. One example of that is Elon Musk. Regardless of whatever type of leader he is, Elon Musk was known to sleep in his office when the times were tough and project deadlines were there. And this would make people very aware of the fact that this founder and the CEO and the owner, the person who is himself very wealthy, is putting in this level of effort. It definitely conveys a sense of expectation. It conveys a culture slowly and steadily, and a culture starts to formulate within the community, within the organization, within your district, within your police station, whatever. And you determine what type of culture it will be. If it's a good one, you may vitiate it, you may disturb it, and if it is not a good one, you may make it a good one by leading by example, by showing up on time, by not being negligent, by being empathic to the people who come to you, to the people who require your assistance, to the people who require your guidance, you know. And so, coming to the human side of the universe, questions about governance can yield a lot of debates, right? Emotional intelligence is an important concept, and it attributes that people need to exhibit this type of emotional intelligence, and it has a huge overlap with governance, right? Our nation, you see, our emotions, they need to be as educated as the intellect. It is impossible to know how you feel, how to respond, how to let life in so that it can touch you. Our emotional abilities and the way we comprehend our emotional behavior matters, because when our emotional abilities aren't given permission, and if we don't have self-awareness, we are not able to manage our distressing emotions well. This leads to pent-up emotions, this leads to nervous breakdowns, it leads to conflicts, it leads to anger, it leads to bad decisions, it leads to bad governance, and it leads to frustration and just the spiral of negativity. You don't want that spiral, you want to break that spiral. The only spiral you want is the spiral of positivity and growth, right? And so you understand that once emotional intelligence and the understanding of emotion enters into the picture, we are already talking about reducing anger, we are talking about reducing pride, reducing ego, reducing negative emotions, increasing positive emotions, and using thought and letting the emotions facilitate thought to bring about positive changes. And that's what leadership is all about. And that is exactly what good governance is also all about. It's just a manner of speaking about different words in different layers. At the level of the individual, it's called emotional intelligence. It may be called empathy. It may be called something else. It may be called leadership, in fact. And if you talk about it at the level of entire public services, you're talking about good governance. If you talk about it at the level of businesses, you are talking about corporate social responsibility or corporate good governance or business ethics or whatever you want to call it. The essence of the issue is same. An interesting segue into the ethics and the ethics of emotional intelligence, the emotional intelligence of ethics, the interplay between them is the concept of dharma, or the concept of dhamma if you talk about the Buddhist way of looking at things. In any case, you see, the dictates of truth and ultimate law manifests as dharma, or a set of universally valid ethical principles. That's dharma, and in fact, dharma also might become the subject matter of a question in your case studies. We'll talk about that. The nature of the state, which is supposed to administer good governance, or to administer dharma, or to administer laws and policies and implement them in a way which is ethically responsible. The nature of the state may change from place to place and from one era to another. Raj Dharma, in the non-denominational sense, always reigns supreme. At coronation ceremonies in the past, the king in India used to say, "I am supreme and I can do no wrong." Right? Upon this, the Rajguru would gently strike the king on his head with a staff and exhort him, "No, you are not supreme. Dharma is supreme. You are just the carrier of Dharma." And therefore, it's an interesting way of looking at things in which you will hear why Emperor Ashok was considered great, why he was the great Ashok, why he was regarded as somebody great and perhaps at a higher pedestal than many other rulers of his time, his contemporaries. That's because he understood the value of compassion. That's very important. He understood the value of compassion. He then used his compassion to spread the idea of good governance. In the edicts and in the inscriptions on his pillars, you will find discussions and prescriptions for good governance at that period in time, thousands of years ago. He had that insight and he acted on that insight. And that's what makes him great, that's what sets him apart, right? But also, it was understood at that time that the king was the manifestation of a higher power, right? And so he used to call himself Priyadarshini, the beloved of the gods. And it was also the case with Egyptian pharaohs. And the Egyptian pharaoh was by default considered to be the body of God in man. And so it was not uncommon to regard rulers as as supreme, as being of a completely different league altogether, of being kings and gods, and it was all it had a very top-down, superior-inferior relation with the others. This is now changing. Ethical intelligence, emotional intelligence, good governance, all of it points to a more democratization, a lower distance between the top and the bottom, a more open culture, a more self-aware culture, a leader who is responsible and who will admit mistakes, who will allow people to express themselves, who will figure out the best ways to motivate different people according to their different emotional makeups, according to their different sensitivities, according to their different needs, right? The degree to which that leader can understand this is the degree to which that leader is a good leader. And of course, like we spoke about in ethics, always when you talk about ethics, complications arise because it is not easy to carry out your compassion. In order for you as a civil servant or for anyone else to carry out compassion at a large scale, you may carry out compassion with a few cases, with a few people. You may donate money, you may take care of an entire family, you may teach students who can't afford education, you may teach people in your area, you may do a lot of individual efforts. But if you want to implement things at a larger scale, then your compassion becomes complicated because you then need to deal with laws and a lot of implications of your actions. And that is where ethics comes into the picture. How to determine what is right and what is wrong in those gray types of areas, right? And so this emotional intelligence is a central concept which comes to the rescue at that time. Ethics must indeed begin at the top, right? Ethics and the ethical culture of an organization begins at the top. It is the responsibility, moral obligation of the leader to set an example, to set things and to declare how things are supposed to be, right? And since ethics is always not very clear, it's always in a gray area, to demonstrate with examples what is ethical conduct so that it may be emulated, so that his lead position or his or her position of leadership may be put to maximum use. You see, it must begin at the top. Leaders cannot shrink from their obligation to set a moral example for their followers. Gandhiji used to do that all the time. In fact, he had enormously, almost impossible ethical standards, and he followed them. And it was for people to see around them. He did not hide them. Formal ethical codes and ethics trainings have little chance of success unless the ethical actions and behavior of the top leaders, the top civil servants, are consistent with what they teach. That stands true for our politicians as well. Leaders are the keys to determine the outcome of an organization or a government, and they set the tone for the other civil servants, for employee behavior, and for the rest of the stakeholders. You know, it includes promotion, appraisal, strategy, public service delivery, all of those things. Organizational leaders, public service leaders, bureaucrats, senior leaders, and politicians should encourage employees By leading by example, they have the responsibility to define organizational norms and values and culture. They must live up to that expectation and encourage their leaders to their followers to adopt the same. Now, when you talk about ethics and leadership, there is a new concept and a new idea which has emerged, and it is called a transformational ethics. Transformational ethics appears when you have leadership and emotional intelligence and ethics all in one. Leadership, emotional intelligence all in one leads to something called transformational ethics. This may appear as a separate question in your exam, and in any case, you should know about it. So, by there are some principles of transformational ethics. When used, leaders with emotional intelligence are able to demonstrate their commitment by honoring the values which are held by the individuals with whom they work, their colleagues, their subordinates, whatever. And in so doing, these same leaders convey to employees that they respect each other's values and they are willing to personally hold themselves accountable to the obligations and standards of ethical leadership. And because ethical leadership is so important in building trust in virtually every relations, leaders who incorporate emotional intelligence in their interactions with others and they communicate this to their employees, that they view the leader follower association as an opportunity to help others succeed. See, that's a critical difference. An emotionally intelligent leader, a leader following transformational ethics, will view that leader follower situation of them being leader and that position as an opportunity more than anything else to help others succeed. That is how they will perceive their own role as leaders, rather than to simply issue orders and for others to follow those orders. So a very different perspective and mindset. I think you could use this knowledge, this understanding directly in your answer. Emotional intelligence will build commitment by treating colleagues, employees, officers as full owners and partners and stakeholders, and it will convey that the leader views their role as a facilitator, his role as a facilitator and a coach, not as an owner or as a ruler or anything, rather than as a person who is guiding the process along, And the clear evidence of recent research has confirmed that leaders who adopt a top-down command and control micromanaging type approach is no longer effective in modern organizations or modern bureaucracies or modern public services.